Welcome in to the latest edition of Gridiron Eve. I'm John Bogle, and this is Mike Huseman. And how are we doing this week, Mike?
We are doing well. It's been a fun week. As this time of year, we've already had some action. 3 games last night, 3 more tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Coming off of a fun week 10, I feel like not a lot of action for us. We just had the one game, which I was fortunate enough that Alabama covered. But real life-wise, we had some interesting games. Ohio State had ranked number 1 by the playoff committee, struggled early against Rutgers, then pulled away late. Georgia got a win, which we expected them to do, but they're another team who looked better in the second half. They put that game away late. And the Texas-Kansas State game was a fun one. I don't really say Chris Klieman does too many things wrong. I thought he made some bad calls in that game against Texas, but he was going for it. I'll give him credit for that. And USC continues the slide. That was a bad one.
Yeah, it was another horrendous loss.
Yeah.
And it sparked a huge conversation this week about Caleb Williams and his preparedness for, I guess, the NFL.
Yeah.
That was, again, I think we had talked about it a little bit on this show about how USC has some offensive scheme issues. I know I talked a lot about it on my podcast, the Sick Podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
Spend a lot of time talking about that and how that would affect Caleb's professional, what's the word I'm looking for? Projection.
Acumen, his readiness, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, so that was a big deal, and we saw that kind of rear its ugly head. Though I did prepare something special for you this week. So I wanted to make sure that this got brought up.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
NCAA football, if you remember that old video game. Solid win for Vogel, saying it all. Now, granted, it didn't happen this week. I lost 5 points to you on our one challenge. You got me on Georgia and Missouri. I challenged you on that.
No, Bama LSU.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, Bama LSU. My bad. Yeah. And I thought Bama would cover. And I think that's what. No, I said LSU.
No,
I said
LSU.
LSU. That's
LSU,
right.
Yeah.
I thought LSU would cover. Yeah. That defense is a little bit better. Jalen Milroe, 4 touchdowns rushing. Where'd that come from?
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to do before we get into the challenges, there's 2 teams I wanted to give a lot of credit to. One of which is also patting you on the back. Boston College doing the right things now. Castellanos is keeping them in games, and the Eagles are really turning things around. Jeff Hafley's doing well.
Yep.
And the other team who looked really impressive lately is the Arizona Wildcats with Jed Fish doing a lot of good things. They're 6-3 now. They're going to go to a bowl game. I don't think we ever thought, they were 1-11 when he took over. 2 years later, they're going to be playing in a decent bowl game. So you certainly were on BC earlier than I was. I was ready to fade them after week 3. I distinctly remember saying this team could be double-digit losses. Well, now they might go to a bowl game too. So
to go back to Arizona here, their last game stretch isn't too bad either. They've got Colorado on the road, which they're 10.5-point favorites right now for that game. They've got Utah, and they've got Arizona State on the road. So, they're in a really good position to actually compete. I don't think they're going to get there, but in theory, if they win out and the right teams lose a couple games over there, because the rest of the Pac-12 has their brutal stretch between Oregon and Washington and all those teams, we could see Arizona potentially playing very close to a very high New Year, or maybe even a New Year's Six Bowl.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. The Utah game will be tough for them. The way they play doesn't match up well for them with Utah, but you like them to beat Colorado and Arizona State. For that conference title game, Arizona's in it. I mean, they have 2 losses in the conference. Oregon just has the 1. Washington obviously is undefeated.
Yeah.
But those 2 teams still have some tough games left. I'm very excited to see the Civil War last game of the year. Oregon State could be a really fun game, especially because it might have conference title game connotations.
It could be one of the best and it'll probably be the last Civil War we see for a little while. You know,
absolutely. Yeah,
we talked about the last Bedlam. Now we're talking about this. You know what else we're going to be talking about that week? The last Apple Cup for a while.
Yeah.
Think about that for a minute. Let that sink in.
Yeah.
It's brutal. It's brutal out here. So enjoy all of these wonderful rivalries while we can still get them. And they're all hot top matches this year, really.
You know, speaking of that last game rivalry, with the SEC editions, will Florida State be affected at all in rivalry week or not?
I don't think so, because they're still rolling an 8-game in conference schedule.
That's right. Yeah, you're right.
So that shouldn't affect anything. They're going to go to 16, so you'll play 8 and then rotate. You'll have a lock.
Yes.
And then you'll rotate and play the other 7. I think is what they're doing. So 7 and 7.
Most of the teams' locks stay the same. I know. South Carolina's is still going to be Texas A&M.
Yep.
Which is the oddest one, but yeah.
Tennessee and Alabama, I think.
Auburn and Georgia.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of locks like that.
I think LSU and Florida are a lock with each other too.
Mm-hmm. So it'll be fun. The SEC, the Big Ten, they're about to be crazy next year. It's going to be a lot of fun.
And Ole Miss got Vandy for their lock. I know that. So they had to be happy about that.
They have to be so happy about that. Like that's a give me. Yeah, you're getting a give me every year.
Yeah.
Well, we ready to get into the rounds here, Who's?
I'm ready when you are. Yeah.
Let's do it. So we're going to start things off. You like Iowa State minus 6.5 over BYU.
I do like the Cyclones. They are a team who, similar to what we've talked about before, I was fading them early in the year. They lost to Iowa. Mm-hmm. They lost to Ohio in a bad one. Then they beat Oklahoma State before they decided to start handing Ollie Gordon the ball all the time and became a good team. But notwithstanding the Kansas loss this last week, Iowa State's been playing well. They beat TCU, Cincy, and Baylor all in a row, and in none of those games did they allow more than 2 touchdowns. They're getting back to playing the Matt Campbell football where they're going to get in a rock fight with you, and they don't mind mucking it up, keeping things close. And this BYU offense is not good. They have really struggled, especially in the games they've lost. I mean, we've seen them in their losses. These they did score 27 in the one game against Kansas, but their other losses, 11 points, 6 points, 7 points. And in one of their wins, they only had 14. So I don't trust that BYU can score enough to keep this game within a touchdown. I expect it to end up being like a 21-10 type game. I don't think either team scores too many. Iowa State's not that type of team. I like him to play good enough defense and field position to win by at least 7, though.
Yeah, so did you know when the first time these two teams met?
I couldn't tell you when the first time they met was.
1968.
Okay.
The Cougars are 0-4 all time against the Cyclones.
That surprises me because throughout the 80s and the early 90s, BYU was legit and Iowa State was terrible. So
right, but they haven't met since 1974 is the problem. Yeah, so they missed all those good BYU teams and everything, but this is not a team that's up there with the good BYU. I thought about challenging this initially, just because when BYU has played offense, they've been pretty darn good. I mean, that Arkansas game you go back to on the road, they played really well.
They did.
That Texas Tech game, they played really well. They played really well against Cincinnati on a Friday night. And then even Kansas too. But overall, their defense has allowed 35-37 the last 2 games. In their last 3 losses, because they're 1-3 in that stretch, they haven't allowed under 35 points. And in every loss that they've given up, it's been over 35. Kansas beat them 38-27. So this Iowa State is not a team that's going to score a lot. But when I look at the overall body of work, especially here, the offense struggling the last few weeks, I can't challenge it right now as much as I almost want to. At 7, it's going to be somewhere around there. BYU's not going to win, I don't think. But it's going to be somewhere between 10 and 3. And I don't know which one it'll be.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to let that one go. I don't have a lot of confidence in BYU covering 6.5. So I'm going to go ahead and agree with you.
Okay.
Now I do like Wyoming. I've been all over Wyoming this year, and it's because Wyoming started the season playing extremely well. We talked about it here. I predicted them to upset Fresno State, which they did. Their defense is extremely disruptive. The last couple games haven't gone great for Wyoming.
No, I haven't.
And I think it's a factor of a lot of different things. First off, this is a gritty, grind it down. We're going to play it hard, lean on our defense, get our offense to just move the ball enough for us. That it lost to Air Force. They scored 27. The loss to Boise State on the road on the blue turf. They scored 7. They got the win over Colorado State.
That was a weird game. They got killed against Boise, but the game spiraled out of control earlier, and they just didn't have a chance to claw back.
And they're not a team that can come back, in battle. I understand why UNLV is, favored in this game, because their offense, golly, they've been explosive this year. They've just found some pieces and started to be able to score a lot. They're scoring 40 points a game pretty darn consistently. The loss they have is to Fresno State in conference outside of the Michigan loss early in the year. But they scored 24 in that one too. So the thing about this team that I think is big is what's making them explosive is their passing game. They've been extremely explosive in the passing game. That's exactly what Wyoming disrupts. And so for that reason, on top of just the fact that the Cowboys are 5-1 straight up and against the spread in UNLV over the last 6 years, I like Wyoming to win this one outright and obviously cover -5.5.
Similar to what you said with the previous game, I thought about challenging this one, and a lot of the metrics, lines, and whatnot give some value in UNLV, but I'm not going to challenge this one, largely because of what you said. With what UNLV has been particularly effective at is where Wyoming's pretty good on defense. So I think this is more a game where they score around 24-ish points, not the 40 they've been scoring. And I still think UNLV could win, but I view this game more as a coin flip. So I don't trust that they win by the touchdown that would be required for them to cover this game.
Right. Yep.
So Barry Odom's done an amazing job in year one, though. I never thought he would do as well as he has this year. And I think with him coming over from Arkansas, where he was DC, if things really fall off the wagon for Pittman and he loses his job, Odom will be in the mix for that one.
Which is, it makes you wonder, what was Odom doing at Mizzou?
Yeah.
He had Drew Lock. He had an offense, and he had some good defenders. And what was he doing? I don't know.
He did inherit a situation where a lot of guys had transferred out, and it wasn't. Remember, they had that kind of a lot of the racial issues there in the wake of the Mike Brown stuff, which was a bad deal.
Yeah, that is true.
But that kind of spilled over to the Mizzou campus. So he took over a situation that wasn't great there. But doing great now, and I don't know how long he'll be at UNLV. Brennan Marion, their O coordinator, is he's the go-go offense guy, so they'll do the shotgun with the 2 running backs on the same side. He wrote a book about it, in fact, called the go-go offense, I believe. But he's kind of been all over the map. He was a Todd Graham guy initially, played for him at Tulsa, and then was his assistant at Arizona State. Then in the last several years, he's been at he was at a couple FCS schools, then Hawaii, Pittsburgh, Texas, and now UNLV, but all for 1 year apiece. So it's been a long time since he stayed somewhere more than a year.
That's fair.
But he's a good mind. Yeah. So I'm not challenging this one. Yeah.
On to the next round. You like Texas State +1, so pick them over Coastal Carolina.
Yes. This line's been all over the place. And depending on where you've looked, I've seen it anywhere from Coastal -2.5 to Texas State -1. Like Depending on where you've seen it, it's all over. But in fairness of the fluctuating line, I say that to set this up as, if we want, I will just take it as a pick 'em, and we can scrap the line. Otherwise, I have no problem keeping it with this line. But Texas State's playing well. TJ Finley is doing a really good job. DJ Kinney is a heck of a coach. Did great things at Incarnate Word last year. FCS, they made the semifinals. They totally overhauled the team early in the season. I talked about this a little bit. After Colorado, they had more incoming portal guys than any FBS team. They right now sit at 6-3, so they know they're going to a bowl game. They beat the pants off of Georgia Southern last week. And this Coastal team is hurting. Grayson McCall's not going to play. It sounds like Jared Guest is also probably not going to play, which means third stringer Ethan Vasco will start again. He ran the ball extremely well against Marshall last week, but I will say this as a Marshall guy, I think they've kind of packed it in. They've lost 5 in a row, but he didn't throw the ball too well. Didn't have to, but I don't think in this game Coastal will be able to be one-dimensional and still keep it competitive, because Texas State's going to score points on anybody. So I like them to go on the road and get a W against Coastal. They've we talked about them throwing it, Finley, the Auburn LSU transfer, but their offense has kicked it into gear since Ismail Mahdi's become the main back. He's running extremely well.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah, I think, I had him on my fantasy team before I got knocked out. He was about the only good player.
Yeah. Finley's on mine, so I'm hoping they keep it going.
I got killed this year in that fantasy league. It was bad. I'm
moving on to the quarterfinals, so happy.
Congratulations. Yeah. You can dominate the fantasy as long as I dominate this, I suppose. Yeah. But no, I was looking at this too, and it is. I mean, I didn't even know about Grayson McCall. That makes sense. If McCall and Guest aren't playing, I think that first off, Texas State's covered 3 of the last 4 meetings against Coastal, and that was a very bad Texas State team.
Funny you say that. I was talking to Thor Nystrom, friend of the show, yesterday, and he said at the end of the year, Texas State will probably end up being the best against the spread team in the country, just because Vegas hasn't caught up to their lines yet. Yeah,
like it never seemed to kick in. It's like that they've always been behind the 8 ball with them. But they've lost 3 games this year. They're going into this game 6-3. The games that they've struggled in have been games where they played pretty good defenses. I don't think Coastal's got a good defense. Not like Troy, not like UTSA. And then even in the tight games that they've been in, they've been able to squeeze them out. Nevada was a relatively tough game. ULM was a tough game. I think that I like them to cover this one. I'm not challenging. I actually like this one too.
Yeah.
And for all the reasons that you listed, on top of just the fact that Texas State, while they're 1-3 straight up against Coastal, they've covered 3 of the last 4. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's absolutely huge. So the fact that they beat Coastal in one of the last 4 times they played them.
Yeah.
That's crazy. When you think about that. That's a bad team.
And they're a totally different team with Kinney now than what they had been in the past.
Yeah, they're really good now. They're really good. So you got to put it on Texas State here. Absolutely. Yeah. I like Alabama minus 10.5 over Kentucky, my faith wavered in Alabama last week after all the talking that I did on this show about how Alabama, everybody doubts them, and they kind of always answer. They always do a good job, and the refs are always on their side. And
I don't think the refs are always on their side.
I had to throw that in there because everybody's been saying it on Twitter last couple weeks. But no, they absolutely destroyed LSU, and they were able to disrupt that offense even when Jaden Daniels, before he went down. They were disrupting him. They were making it difficult. They allowed them to score 4 touchdowns, which for LSU is a small margin. That offense has been explosive all year. And then Jalen Milroe comes out of nowhere, runs for 4 touchdowns. I guess it's not exactly out of nowhere. We knew that he could run. It was just that's the performance.
Yeah.
That's a. I hate to say it to put it this way, but that's like a Hurts as a freshman type performance.
Yeah,
You know,
Tommy Reese has really come into his own and tailored his play calling to get the best out of Milrow. Man, good for them.
so Alabama is 18-2 straight up when traveling to SEC East foes.
18-2, you said?
Yeah, straight up.
Okay.
So traveling to the East,
Yeah.
they've done a good. One of those losses was Tennessee last year.
Yeah.
You know, so and the other one was probably a Georgia game somewhere down the road.
I was going to say it could have been a Florida game when Spurrier was there too. That would
This is before. This is last 10 years.
Okay.
So yeah, Spurrier wasn't there. It has to be a Georgia game at some point.
No, it was South Carolina when Stephen Garcia was the QB.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. It was South Carolina. Yeah. So when you look at this Kentucky team, is there anything on this Kentucky team that tells you that they're going to be able to compete with Alabama, considering the Alabama we've seen the last couple weeks?
So to play devil's advocate, I will say yes, and that would be if Ray Davis can just carry the load. I don't think he can. I don't think it's going to happen.
No.
I'm not challenging this one. I was never prepared to say it until this week, but I 100% believe Alabama is now a national title contender.
Yes.
I wouldn't want to play them right now because they know what they're doing. Even let me expand on that. Even more so than all the good teams know what they're doing. Alabama really knows what their limitations are, and they stay away from their limitations hurting them at this point.
Yep.
So I do think there is a scenario where Kentucky can cover this, but I see that percentage likelihood as very low. So I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Devin Leary is consistent, but he's nothing like Alabama hasn't seen before. And the same with Ray Davis. I don't see Kentucky. I feel like this game ends up being maybe like the LSU game was last week, maybe even, like Kentucky's Georgia game was 42-21, something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, is that kind of what you're seeing here?
Yeah, so what's kind of funny is Saban's traveled to Lexington twice as the Alabama head coach.
Okay.
The first time was in 2009. They won 38-20. The second time was in 2013. They won 48-7.
Okay.
So I think it's probably going to be in that 42-14 range is what I'm kind of seeing. I think 10.5 is going to be an easy cover here. I know that the averages, Kentucky gets a chance in it, but come on, let's be realistic here. Kentucky is going to have to do everything right. And for Kentucky against teams like this, home field advantage has not played a huge factor the last couple of years outside of maybe that Georgia game in 21 with Levis. That's the only time I can think of it.
Yeah.
So they don't have a Levis. They don't have a Will Levis right now.
They don't.
Moving on to round 3. You like Arkansas staying in the SEC -3 over Auburn.
I like this Arkansas team now. Hated them a month ago, but I think they've figured out what they're doing. They had success in previous years running at a very fast tempo and keeping the ball on the ground, running with multiple people, getting Jefferson out of the pocket and play actioning. Then Dan Enos came in and they played at a snail's pace. Teams caught up to them. And also Rocket Sanders has been hurt the whole year.
Yeah, that's been a huge part of it.
Rocket's back now, and Kenny Guyton has them playing very fast again. They were a different team that went to the Swamp and won for the first time ever at Florida last week in a game that went to overtime. They look totally different. I like this Auburn team. I think Hugh Freeze is a fantastic coach. But they're still basically in a year zero, year one, mindset with him where it's getting guys in the system. They're playing more for next year. Sam Pittman's playing for his job right now. And this game is in Fayetteville. Razorbacks will be at home. And with a healthy Jefferson and a Rocket playing, in the new offense, which is kind of the old offense. I like the Hogs to get a W here and cover this one.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is one that Auburn has traditionally dominated over Arkansas, especially in recent memory. Arkansas, though, did end a 6-game losing streak against Auburn last year, winning 41-27.
I'm saying Gus really had Arkansas's number, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, no, but here's an interesting little thing, and a really interesting stat. The home team in the last 4 games in this series is 0-4 against the spread.
So last year, Auburn packed it in. They were at home last year. That doesn't surprise me. The year before, I'm a little surprised by that. Because neither of these teams was that good that year.
Yeah. So the other thing that's interesting is when Freeze was at Liberty last year, they almost upset Arkansas.
They did. Yeah.
That was a very close game. It was 27-19. So I'm just looking at these couple things right here, and I'm thinking, yeah, I think Auburn's got a really good chance. Auburn's been playing good football here the last couple weeks too.
They have.
Granted, their opponents haven't been great. Mississippi State, they won by 14. Vanderbilt, they won by 16. And then when they played Ole Miss, they went down to the wire with that offense. 28-21. Ole Miss had to pull that one out. So I'm going to challenge this. I kind of like Auburn over this on this one. Getting the upset, honestly, probably winning outright. Just because history tells me that Hugh Freeze has done really well against Arkansas. And Arkansas, they had a good week last week coming off a bye week. They had 2 weeks to prep for Florida. Florida did not have 2 weeks to prep for them. I think that's a huge part of that. But also, outside of that Florida game, I'm still looking at this big body of work with all these L's where that offense sputtered and struggled, even against a Mississippi State team at home. I have to go with Auburn on this one.
Yeah, okay. I get that, yeah.
Now,
we got our first challenge, yeah.
Going into the Big Ten, I like Michigan to cover 4.5 against Penn State. And I know of everything going surrounding the Michigan program, and Stallions has resigned, and they don't have the signals anymore. Come on. Have you watched this Michigan team? Have you watched them?
I have watched them.
They are phenomenal.
Good.
They are loaded. They have 2 running backs that are probably 2 of the top 5 guys going to the NFL draft next year, if they both declare.
Yeah.
They've got a quarterback that's in contention for the Heisman Trophy. He's playing pretty good. They got a couple wide receivers that are NFL guys. They got like 6 or 7 guys on that offensive line that are all NFL guys. Their defense is stacked. We're making a big deal about the signs, but it's like, look at the team on the field. Look at them. They're killing it. Now, granted, Penn State, they've had a really good year. They actually came off a really good game last week, took care of business on the road against Maryland, absolutely blew them out. Good rebound game off of a loss to Ohio State, and then that close one against Indiana. I'm just not convinced with James Franklin watching him in these matchups year after year after year after year. It's always hyped up. Penn State always has a chance. Sometimes I want to buy into it. I can't do it. I'm going Michigan -4.5. I think that they probably win by double digits.
Yeah, if this one was a little bigger, I would do it. If I could take Penn State by a touchdown, certainly I'd be in. With this margins, knowing they have to keep it within a field goal, basically, I don't have faith that they can do that. This Michigan team is the real deal. Their offensive line is fantastic. I mean, the last 2 years they've won the Moore Award for having the best O-line overall, and they've deserved it, probably. They create running gaps better than teams I've seen in a long time. PJ Fleck, University of Minnesota coach, who's had a lot of success at 2 schools, says they're the best college team he's seen in 11 years. And he's not one to dole out praise super easy to the opponents. I also, people might make things of the Stallions, the scandal. I don't think that's going to bother the players much, though. I think Harbaugh will be able to keep them as insulated from it as you can, and keep their eye on the prize of that's a distraction, and if we take care of our business and win all our games, there's no way they can keep us out of the playoffs.
Yeah.
So I think at the end of the day, it comes down to a little faith that Harbaugh knows what he's doing here, and also, like you had mentioned, that Franklin has not performed well in games like this.
Yeah, no, it's just the odds are stacked against Penn State. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
And with or without the signs, doesn't matter.
I will say I thought a lot about this one. I think Penn State's live. They're in it. They could get a W at home, but I don't have enough faith in them to do that, to challenge this one.
That's absolutely fair. Moving on to round 4. Flying through this one challenge so far, and it's by me, the winner. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You like Fresno State at -1 over San Jose State.
Fresno State's been an interesting team. They started off pretty well. They had gotten some wins where we may have not expected them to. They lost that 5-pointer at Wyoming, a team we already talked about today. They beat Utah State, and then the last 2 weeks, they've beaten 2 good teams in UNLV and Boise.
Yep.
There are some injury concerns. So it took me doing homework in this one before going with Fresno, but I do have enough faith in them to think that they can beat a 4-5 San Jose State team on the road. San Jose is coming off a couple wins: Hawaii, Utah State, New Mexico, and they actually kept it close in some of their losses. Boise State and Toledo, Air Force and Oregon State kind of beat the pants off them. But with this Fresno team, I think they're the real deal. Tedford knows what he's doing, and at just the one loss, they know they could be getting into a better bowl game than they've had for a while. To me, this line is almost a mistake. I trust Fresno to get the W in this one.
Yeah, so Fresno's won 4 of the last 5 meetings against San Jose State. When you look at them traditionally, it's a pretty back and forth series. Fresno does lead at 44-38, but in recent memory, especially even looking at last year, San Jose was favored by 7 to win this. They lost by 7 to Fresno. Fresno's won, like I said, 4 of the last 5. This is a good offense. They've been pretty consistent with that. Even, the one, I guess you could say what's the word I'm looking for? The one blip on the radar, the thing that doesn't make sense is that Wyoming game. But again, gritty, very tough, really good pass defense. I don't see San Jose State being able to hang with them, especially when you look at how Fresno State's defense has played in conference this year. They've been able to keep them in games. They've been able to get the stops when they need them and keep the offense on the field. While their margin of victory hasn't been great, I don't need to worry about that at -1. I just need to worry about them getting the win. And for those reasons, I like this one too. I'm not touching it.
Okay.
I'm going to take us back to the SEC. Who's
okay?
We got a loaded SEC slate this week.
We sure do. Yeah.
And as much as it pains me to say, as I bleed orange, I like Mizzou at +1.5 over Tennessee. Let's talk about Tennessee here a little bit, because when this team has played against a good defense this year, they have struggled.
They have.
Well, when I say good defense, I mean a defense up relative to their level. Because, UTSA has a good defense, but not for the Power 5.
No, you're right about that. Yeah.
But with Texas A&M, they scored 20. For whatever reason, Texas A&M's offense couldn't get it done that day. They scored 13. Balls win. Alabama.
And one of the Vols touchdowns, the winning one, was a punt return.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Alabama, 20. They scored 20 in that game. And that was just a lot of really weird, I don't know how he just scored. I still don't know how Squirrel White caught that touchdown against Alabama.
Yeah.
That's still not making sense to my head. And so those are the two top defenses that they played this year. They won a close one against Kentucky that they probably shouldn't have, and then obviously last week they dominated Connecticut, which is not hard to do. So looking at Mizzou is playing extremely well this year. I think they've outperformed everybody's expectations. I know Phil Steele thought they'd be in the bottom of the SEC East, but down there with Vanderbilt. And no, they're ranked. They're at the top. They've lost 2 games, one to LSU and one to Georgia, which is huge. The other thing is when Tennessee goes to Missouri, they have traditionally had a lot of trouble playing there. I remember very well I was a newly christened Tennessee fan, and Mizzou it was their first year in the SEC, and it was supposed to be a game that Tennessee was going to come in here and blow the brakes off of them. They went to overtime and Mizzou won. It was a 59-52 game. Not James Franklin. The quarterback was somebody Franklin, and he absolutely lit him up.
Yeah, I know who you're talking
absolutely about. Lit him up. So, again, it's hard for me to look at this matchup and think that Tennessee has a really good shot in this game. I know Josh Heupel was there. I don't like Tennessee to win this game. Regardless of whatever there might be, Elijah Drinkwitz has got a really good offense. They've got everything dialed in. They're going to be able to move the ball against Tennessee. And I think that they're going to have a good enough defense to slow down what Tennessee wants to do. Because when you look at what Tennessee does offensively, we ranted and raved about it for a year, but it's like the rest of the SEC's caught up to it. There's not a lot of difference to it. You play leverage to their routes, you force it back inside, you play somebody underneath, and now you don't have that quarterback that gives you the dynamic running threat that Hendon Hooker did. So all those reasons, I like Mizzou to win this outright.
Okay. You were right, by the way, Vogel. It was James Franklin.
It was okay.
James Franklin. I had to Google because I was like, no, that's not his first name. But it in fact was James Franklin.
That was my first heartbreak as a Tennessee fan. Okay. Was that game? I remember it very well.
Yeah. This game. I am challenging in this game. I'm going with the Vols in this one.
Whoa. Okay.
Yep. I'm going with the Vols. I have been impressed by them lately. I mean, they should have been impressive last week against UConn, but since the Florida loss where they couldn't tackle anybody, they've looked pretty good on defense. They've not made the mistakes they did. They're forcing turnovers. The Alabama game went again. The second half, they played terrible. Also, Luther Burden is a game-time decision in this one after getting dinged up against Missouri. So if he plays, obviously, that helps them a lot. But if he's a game-time decision, I'm banking he's not going to be full strength either. And Tennessee's found ways to do a lot of good things. I think they're running the ball better than I expected them to. You know, like you had talked about, running the ball with Hooker, made it a lot easier for them. They've done better with their running backs than I thought they would this year, though. And Joe Milton has been better than I expected he would as well. We knew he had maybe the strongest arm on planet Earth, but he is making good decisions, better than we expected him to. And I kind of wonder if, after Mizzou lost last week, their second loss of the year, some of their goals are now tough to come by if they have somewhat of a letdown after that. And Tennessee's not a team I would want to have a letdown against. They're very well coached. There are not many guys I like to X's and O's better than Heupel. So I am going with the Vols to cover this one. I initially thought about double challenging it, but then I had initially read it wrong and thought it was in Neyland. That's why. No, this isn't Furrow. I can't. I'm not going to double challenge a road favorite.
That's fair.
I'm just challenging Tennessee in this one. I like the Vols.
You ready for one more stat before I move on to the next round?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Tennessee this year is 0-3 against the spread on the road.
Were they favorites against Kentucky in that game?
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They were about 9-point favorites. They
Obviously,
lost.
yeah, Bama beat them by a couple scores.
That was a single point spread, and they were favored to beat Florida.
Yeah, the Gators beat
They were favored to win that game, and they didn't. So they're 0-3 against the spread on the road this year. This is their final road game of the year. They got Georgia and Vanderbilt left to play at home.
It's wild that they only have 4 road games the whole year.
That's the SEC for you, bro.
The Virginia game was a neutral one. That's why I'm wrong.
Yep.
Yeah. Because that wasn't that where the Titans play in Nissan?
Yes. Yeah, they played in Nissan Nashville. Yeah. So round 5, staying in the SEC. Like I said, we got some loaded SEC matches this week. You like Ole Miss to cover 11 against Georgia?
I do. And this Georgia team is good. We saw that last week. Georgia might have the best pass D in the country, but run D wise, they're not nearly as good as they were the last 2 years. Statistically, they're middle of the road for a P5 conference. And Quinshaw Judkins is finally showing up to play. He's looked very good the last few weeks. I don't know if he was dinged up or what early on. Maybe Lane just had a long-term plan for him. But their O-line's looking a lot better. Judkins is running the ball. And they've become efficient throwing when they have to. But they're looking like they did last year, where they became a real run-heavy team. And there certainly is an amount of faith in this pick. It's always tough to pick against Georgia. I think Ole Miss has a chance to win. I'm not saying they do win, but if you're giving me a touchdown and a field goal, I'll take that in this matchup because this is one of the better teams Lane's had in a long time. Maybe the best team he's had at Ole Miss. Like I said, a few different things that, they're doing really well. With Ole Miss here, I some stat. They are quite well at forcing interceptions. Georgia's throwing the ball more than they have in the past. John Saunders was a huge portal pickup for Ole Miss. Maybe they can get back to turn the ball over. And I just like Ole Miss to be able to run the ball effectively enough, both with Judkins and then Bentley if he has to, and Dart getting out of the pocket more. But they've ran for 24 touchdowns this year and have had about half of that against them. So I like Ole Miss to cover this 11. Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. There's a lot of really different factors. I think the first thing is Georgia has not allowed anyone to score more than 21 on them this year.
Yeah.
The two teams that scored 21 on them were UAB and Mizzou last week. When I look at Ole Miss's defense, they're allowing about what their opponent is averaging per game. When you look at LSU, 49. They came out of that with 55. They win. Right. When you look at the Alabama game, 24. At that point, that's about what Alabama was averaging.
Yep.
Texas A&M last week scored 35 on this defense. That's an anomaly. Even Georgia Tech, when you go back to that game, Georgia Tech scored 23. I think if you put all Georgia Tech's games together, they're averaging about 23 a game. So this defense doesn't move the needle for me. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Because I know we're talking about Georgia maybe having some offensive struggles, maybe not being on top of, not being the same offensive attack that they've been the last few years. That's absolutely true. But this team's still capable of putting 37 to 45 points on the board in this game.
Yeah.
I don't know if Mizzou can get to 28.
Ole Miss.
Ole Miss, yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry. If Ole Miss gets to 28, now we're talking about a game. Yeah. I don't know that. Even if they get to 28, that spread is still iffy. It's very iffy. So, you know what? I'm going to challenge this one. I wasn't going to do this initially.
Okay.
I'm going to challenge it. And even against the fact that this is the last home game Georgia's got this year. Yeah. This is senior day. And they haven't covered a senior day the last 4 years. But I think they do it on this one. I don't think Ole Miss is going to be able to score as effectively against this defense. While their numbers are still down, There's points. They're still holding people out of the end zone. They're forcing them to settle. Lane likes to go for it on fourth down, which means he's not going to kick a lot of field goals in this game. I like Georgia to cover 11.
Okay.
I'm going to keep it in the state, this one's going to hurt you as a Marshall professor.
Yeah.
I'm taking Georgia Southern minus 2.5 over Marshall.
Yeah, Marshall's a disaster right now. They started off hot, and they have not won a game since September. They started off 4-0, had some nice wins, and they have now lost 5 in a row. And the last 3 games they've played, they have scored in single digits.
And on the other hand, Georgia Southern's lost 3 games this year. 1 on the road at Wisconsin, 1 on the road at James Madison, and 1 on the road at Texas State.
Yeah, Texas State took it to them last weekend.
The rest of these games are averaging 45 points a game.
Yeah, Marshall, getting back. We talked about our fantasy teams. I took Ollie second pick in the first round. For most of the season, he's been a stud. When he's played, but things are kind of going against him lately because Cam Fancher is just not effective. He shouldn't be in FBS QB, I don't think. They're not throwing the ball well at all. Teams are stacking the box against him, and Ollie is still doing well. But I don't have any faith that this Marshall team can be balanced enough on offense to sneak out a win in this one. Even though there are some sharps that actually like Marshall in this game, I don't see it. And this Georgia Southern team is throwing the ball well. They have a bunch of good receivers to go with Davis Brin, the Tulsa transfer. Derwin Burgess is a stud. Caleb Hood, Anthony Queeley. And they have some more guys that are receiving. I'm with you on this one.
Yeah, I think Marshall will score double digits. I just don't have a lot of faith in them keeping Georgia Southern under 35.
Yeah.
Clay Helton, you were able to roll off of Clay Helton on this show last year, if you remember.
Yeah.
You did a great job picking some of those games. He's got this offense rolling. They brought in another senior graduate transfer quarterback, Davis Brin, who's been distributing the ball really well. They've got some good receivers. They've got a good running back in Jalen White. They're able to score the ball pretty much at will when they need to, except when they play a good defense, and Marshall just doesn't have that kind of defense that moves the needle for me. So I saw this one, and I was like, well, it's going to hurt Hughes, but I got to go with it. It makes sense. So I think that 2.5 a field goal is a really easy cover here. They probably win by double digits.
Yeah. I think Marshall's path to winning and covering this is if they can really suppress the score, make this a 24-20 type game, 21-17-ish. I don't think that can happen. So I'm not going to challenge that.
Well, here's our challenges this week. Look, man, they're all in the SEC.
Yeah.
A loaded SEC slate does not disappoint, and we are all over the map, which makes sense. SEC is my country, babe. So, Mizzou, you challenged me on Mizzou at plus 1.5 over Tennessee. I challenged you on Arkansas -3 over Auburn and Ole Miss plus 11 over Georgia. And, hey, the SEC, I will say this about the SEC. As someone who has lived in this SEC country, you lived in it too when you went to South Carolina.
Yeah.
But as someone who's lived here for years, for coming up on 2 decades, I've lived here in the SEC. You never know what's going to happen on Saturday with the SEC, and that's why we've got 3 different challenges on SEC games on loaded matchups, because this is the best football on the planet. This is the best, in my opinion, best conference in college football. You just never know what's going to happen any given Saturday.
For the last probably 20-plus years, I would have said it's the best conference. This year, I actually think it's the Pac-12, and it's the first time in a long time I might say that.
Well, I guess we'll see how they do in bowl season.
Yeah. And there's some other interesting games we didn't talk about this week, too. But, yeah, the SEC certainly, it seems like, has a better slate. one game I think people should watch. Not that these teams are any good, but Pittsburgh goes to Syracuse. If the Panthers win, I think Dino might get fired this weekend. I don't know.
And if the Orange win, I think that Narduzzi might get fired.
Yeah, he may have built up a little. I mean, he had the one good year with Kenny Pickett. Maybe he can roll that into a little more of a grace period. I don't know. Utah at Washington is a heck of a game. That Utah team is legit, even with the few losses they have.
I hear what you're saying, but Pitt's 2-7, bro. They're 2-7. They beat Wofford and they beat Louisville, which was shocking.
It was shocking. Yeah,
everybody else has rolled them. I mean, their margin of loss is averaging right there at 20 points.
Yeah,
it's atrocious.
Narduzzi's record overall though is about 20 games above 500. So
it was coming into the year. Now it's about. See, it was 21 coming in. It's 14 now.
They got 9 wins last year, 11 the year before. I don't think he gets fired now.
I guess we'll see.
The other guy who might not have much time left if Houston loses, because Houston and Baylor play. Neither of those teams are any good. If Houston loses, I don't know if Holgo has much left either. Yeah,
I've been hearing stuff about that too.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting.
He went into that West Virginia game and needed to win that to keep his job, and he got it done.
Yeah. Miraculously, they got that win. Yeah, that
was a crazy win. Last second Hail Mary pass. I was watching that, just lost my shit when that happened. Yeah. That was amazing. But
Michigan State goes to Ohio State. I don't see any reason why the Buckeyes won't be ranked number 1 again next week with that game. That Michigan State team has packed it in with everything going on there.
Now, if Michigan beats Penn State, do they jump Georgia? Well, no, I guess not, because Georgia's got Ole Miss.
Based on my projection, they probably would, because I'm expecting Ole Miss to at least cover this game. So maybe. But no, if Georgia wins, they do not drop, I don't think.
Yeah.
That would be a very unfair dropping, to beat a top 10 team and then drop. That's almost unheard of.
And then we didn't even touch on the Pac-12 really in this one at all. But except in the beginning,
I didn't like any of those spreads. They're all about where they
should be. Yeah. But USC will be at Oregon this week, which that's brutal for USC. 1-3 in their last 4 games. All 3 of their last 3 wins have been by a touchdown or less. Yeah. So they've had trouble. On the other flip side of that, Oregon absolutely dominating their competition. Blew out Cal last week, 63-19. Was never a contest. Just took down Utah 35-6 in Utah, and then Washington State they beat by 2 touchdowns. That all coming after the Washington loss, and then Washington's got Utah. That should be a good game as well.
Should be.
Utah's defense will probably give Penix some trouble. And then UCLA, Arizona State at UCLA, Washington State at Cal, and then obviously Arizona at Colorado.
Washington State is a team that needs a win really bad. They've lost 5 in a row. They need to stop the bleeding. Talk about Oregon late. Since that Washington loss, it made me think in my head about another team we talked about earlier today. In the last month, I'm not talking whole season, only the last month, Oregon and Alabama have probably been the 2 best teams in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got it figured out the most. Yeah,
could be too, but
they've got it figured out the most for sure. Mm-hmm. But one last reminder of the score: you're within 10, 15 points on the line this week. No double challenge used. Again, Mizzou. You challenged me on Mizzou, +1.5 over Tennessee. Arkansas -3 over Auburn, and Ole Miss +11 over Georgia.
Yeah.
So
in theory, we could have some pushes, but it looks to be a weekend where we could kind of stay pat. Potentially, I could even go in the lead, or you could really build up a bigger lead and maybe put this one out of reach for the rest of the season.
I think what's more realistic is probably 1-2. One of us goes 1-2, and it's either going to be me pulling within 5 or me pushing to 15.
That's probably accurate. Yeah.
That's
Because before 2 weeks ago, where you got the 15 points, I felt like we went 2-2 against each other for multiple weeks in a row there.
Yeah, we were tight. We were going back and forth. So, but hey, thank you all for tuning in. Mike, you got anything else that you want to throw out here before we get going?
Well, our Heisman race hasn't really changed much in the last week. I don't know that this week we need to touch on that.
Now, next week has some implications.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we'll be able to get into more next week on Heisman and have a lot more to talk about. So, again, thank you for tuning in. For Mike Huseman, you can follow him on Twitter at HusemanCFB. I'm John Vogel. Follow me at Draft Vogel. Follow the show at Gridiron Eve. And we'll be back at it next week. See what the score is. Thanks for tuning in.